Welcome to the 6 Miles to Supper podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Cox, and I've lost over 80 pounds with intermittent fasting 6 days a week, eating whatever I wanted at my meals, taking a cheat day every Sunday, and walking 6 miles a day. And I'm here to help you on your weight loss journey. In today's episode, I wanted to update you guys about my experiences with PMDD. Back in episode 61, that title was Dealing with Depression and Down Days on the Weight Loss Journey. That was back in August 2019. So it's been quite some time since we talked about this. Things have happened in the interceding months that I wanted to share because, when I was going through this, it was a really rough time, but things have gotten a lot better. And so I wanted to share with you what has worked for me. So after I made that episode, there were several more months basically of suffering that went on. I'm pretty sure that I was dealing with PMDD, which stands for Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder. And basically, it's just like a few days of depression right before your period. And this was happening, and the best way I can describe it is that those few days before my period just felt gray. Like I would be on the verge of tears all day long. It was very different than how I'd ever felt before, like PMS. No, this is not like PMS. And it's not even like, just being in a funk. Like the way I feel like when I'm just kind of in a funk and I'm just, like kind of not feeling that great, I can always just snap myself out of it. Like I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen to music or whatever. But the PMDD days were just tough. Like they were just, again, feeling like I'm on the verge of tears all day. I felt like that for the rest of the month, I was delusional or something. Like, I can't believe I was ever happy or whatever. Like, this is reality. I'm just waking up. It was just gray and it was really difficult. But I was determined to figure this thing out. Like, I did not like how I felt. And, one thing that really helped me was to see that there was a definite pattern. And I understood that pretty early on. Like, at first I was just completely baffled, because I wasn't seeing a pattern at first, way back when I first started to notice these symptoms. And that would have been probably back in 2018. One thing that really helped, I researched the heck out of this, and I watched YouTube videos of other women who had dealt with this. Went on like Reddit and all different kinds of places, read everything I could get my hands on about it. The first thing that really helped was to understand that it was coming. And this helped because I was kind of keeping track, and I started to see that pattern. It's usually a few days before my period. I would just start to mentally prepare myself that, okay, this is probably going to happen in a few days. Like right now you're feeling good. In a few days, you might start to feel not so good. And, I was kind of actually afraid to do that in the beginning. I was afraid it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, okay, if I think it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But actually that didn't happen. Like what I started to see was that if I was mentally preparing myself for it, that it actually made it easier to take, that it was like, okay, I understand that this is happening now and this is not going to be my reality forever. It's just going to be for a few days when my periods start, and that was the thing. Whenever my period would start, it was like a thing just clicked in my brain and I was back to normal. The second thing that really helped was taking notes. And I had been taking notes, before I made that episode, but also, throughout the time I started making notes of my mood. And, in the past, I have done the 5-minute journal and I love that practice. And one thing that I added to it at the bottom of the page, I would write mood notes. And that's exactly what I would do. I would write down, what was my mood like that day? Do I feel optimistic? Do I feel pessimistic? Do I feel sad, happy? What? And I would do that every single day so that I could see and kind of track, like, how is my mood going throughout the month? And that was really helpful because in the moment, when you're not feeling good, if you're feeling depressed, it's really hard to be objective with things. And it was just nice to be able to, during those times, look back through my journal and see like, okay, this does happen. This is how I always feel about 3 days before my period. I start to do things like worry about money. I start to feel overwhelmed. I start to just, like get completely down about all these different things. And so based on those first two things, just knowing it was going to happen and paying attention to my mood, when I would see that my mood was starting to take a dive, that's when I got really proactive. I would say, okay, this is a PMDD day, and so we're going to go into attack mode. And that's what I did. Like, I had made a list of everything that I thought may help on those days. And one of the things that I found just as I was researching was it said, trying to keep your brain active during those times. Things like working crossword puzzles or doing jigsaw puzzles or playing games that make you think. Or, just watching funny TV shows, anything to kind of like activate your brain in a positive way was what I tried. And so I made a list, when I was feeling good, of those things that I thought may help in those times. And here was the hard part, though. Actually doing those things when I was not feeling good, because when you're feeling depressed, man, it's hard to just say, I'm doing this thing. And so what helped me, and this has been a thing that gets me through those times when it's really hard to get the motivation, I'm kind to myself. And I treat myself like someone I am responsible for helping. And that's straight out of Jordan Peterson's book called 12 Rules for Life, which I highly, highly recommend. He's a psychologist. And so I really feel like he knows what he's talking about. He deals with people, he's a clinical psychologist. So he deals with actual people who are depressed. And this is something that he says to do, is to treat yourself like you are someone you are responsible for helping. And the way I can help myself do that, because even then it's really hard. Like when you're feeling down on yourself, you can kind of get in the notion that, oh, I'm not even worth helping, But I would ask myself, like, okay, if my daughter was feeling this way, and she was feeling bad about herself, like, what would I tell her to do? And I would say, you got to get up. You can't just lay here and feel bad. You got to get up and do some things. You got to, do a crossword puzzle, treat yourself nicely. And so that's what I would do. I would set lower expectations for the actual day as far as stuff that I was expecting myself to do as far as work went. As always, I found it super helpful to talk things out. And if you don't have somebody that you can talk things out with, for me, that's my husband. I can talk to him about anything at all. And whenever I do, I always feel better. But we would go out for walks and I would just tell him, like, man, this is a rough day. And he would listen. And he was really good about providing perspective, because again, a lot of times what was happening is I would feel like, I'm just not seeing things clearly, and I would always feel like I was failing in some way. But he was always good about pulling me back to actual reality and showing me things objectively. So if you don't have, that kind of person in your life, I would encourage you, find someone, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a priest or a preacher. I don't know, but find somebody that you can talk to. If anything, even if you don't feel like you can talk to somebody, write these things down, because that is very similar to talking, is to just write it down, because at least then it's kind of just a conversation you're having with yourself. You're putting things into words, which I think is really, really helpful. So those are some things that helped along the way. But again, I was still struggling. And in some ways it was getting better because I was at least able to take action, and I was doing a good job of that. But it was like those days where I was experiencing those symptoms, it was like they were getting more severe. Even though I was battling back, it felt like they were getting more severe. And I was having a particularly rough day. It was November 30th, 2019, because yes, I wrote this down in my journal after it happened. I was just having a really hard time. It was a couple of days before my period. I realized, the thing that I was really struggling with was that I hadn't forgiven myself for some things. And it was like throughout the month, I think that this is what was happening. I think that in the back of my mind, I always knew this, that there were certain things I had done, and I'm talking throughout my life, just ways I hadn't lived up to my potential in some way, or done something wrong, or, all these little and big things, and just holding on to these things and not forgiving myself. And I realized, like, I'm carrying this around with me, and it was like it became unbearable during the PMDD times. It was like through the month, it's in the back of my head, but I'm able to not think about it or whatever, but it just amplified it when these symptoms were manifesting. And I realized, that day especially, I realized, I have to forgive myself. And I was terrified. I was so scared to do it because I thought if I forgive myself, then I'm gonna go off the tracks. Like I'm not gonna be a good person anymore. Like the only thing that's keeping me on the straight and narrow is by not forgiving myself for like just constantly holding it over my head that I had messed up in life. And I'm a Christian, and I have believed for a long time God forgives me, and that's all well and good. But for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to forgive myself, if that makes sense. And I knew that I was the only one that could do it. And, this actually kind of goes back a few weeks before this. My husband and I had just had a day where we told each other like everything about our lives, all the ways we had messed up or just fallen short in some way. And it was interesting because it was like after that day, there were little things, that we forgave each other for, and big things and stuff. And I loved him more after that than I'd ever loved him before, and I felt so much closer to him, and it was amazing. But at the same time, it was like I realized, like, wow, I have not forgiven myself for certain things. And I realized, I'm the only one that can do this. Like he can't do it for me. God can't do it for me. Like it's something that I have to do. And I had debated for weeks after that, about forgiving myself. And I was just so scared to do it. And I thought, it just occurred to me on that day, November 30th, I thought, I keep saying to myself, well, I can't really truly forgive myself because if I ever do, man, I'll go off the tracks, But this PMDD thing, I think it magnified it so much, and it showed me like, this is the thing that's throwing me off the tracks. It's not that by not forgiving myself, I'm like keeping myself on the straight and narrow. It was the thing that, if anything, was separating me from truly feeling closer to God and closer to my husband and everything, because I was just holding all that against myself. And so I just said, I'm going to forgive myself. And if you've never had that experience, I don't know any other way to describe it except I felt like a huge burden, a huge weight was just lifted off of me, and it was just gone. And I felt lighter and I felt better. And it's been amazing. And since that time, I have not had any PMDD symptoms. And I don't know, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe it was going to happen anyway. Maybe, I forgave myself. Yeah, but there was also this hormonal thing going on in the background. I don't know. I really don't. And I don't know what the future holds either. Like, who knows? There may be another bout coming. But I do know this, that after that day, I've just been able to feel better, about myself, about life. I feel a lot more positive. And I don't carry around that same burden that I did carry around. And I've had lots of periods since that time. And every time, it's just been the same. It's just been like what periods used to feel like. Now, I don't want it to seem like that since that day, I've never doubted, like, did I really forgive myself? Because that's kind of a tricky thing, right? Like, how do you know you've really forgiven yourself? But one thing I do is I remind myself of it every day. And I do that when I'm writing in my journal. In my affirmations, one of the last things I write is that God forgives me and I forgive myself. And that's, because we all fall short. I feel like every day I'm falling short in some way. I'm not being the best wife I can be, or the best mom I can be, or the best Christian I can be, or the best, friend or sister or daughter or daughter-in-law. There are all these ways that I don't measure up. And I've got to forgive myself for that every day, or it will become this burden, this thing that I feel like is maybe helping me be better, but really it's not. And so I'd encourage you right now, if there is something that you still feel bad about, like you just haven't let go and you're afraid to let it go, let it go. I really feel like it's the thing that helped me. Now, look, I am not a psychologist or a doctor or a psychiatrist or anything like that. And I would encourage you right now, like if you're dealing with something like PMDD, get the help that you need, and whatever that means for you. do it because you're worth it. But I do feel like a lot of people struggle with guilt and with just holding on to stuff and holding on in the hopes that, if you just hold on to it, then you won't make the same mistakes. But I really feel like that's the wrong way to do it. I feel like the right thing to do is to just say to yourself, man, I screwed up that time. And that was not good, but everybody screws up. And so I'm going to forgive myself and I'm going to try really hard in the future to not do that thing and see how that works. Because I'm telling you, the old way that I tried did not work for me. And my life has gotten much better once I finally forgave myself. So I hope that this episode has helped you, and I'll see you in the next one. This episode is brought to you by my latest book, Overcoming Weight Loss Obstacles: How to Keep Going When Things Get Difficult. In this book, I talk about all the hard parts of my journey. I also include all the obstacles I've faced during maintenance, which have actually proved to be some of the most daunting ones so far. This book prepares you mentally for what to do when these things happen and gives you actionable steps to take. At the end of each chapter, there's a case study of my own experience with the obstacle and what helped me move past it. It's available as an ebook or paperback on Amazon and as an audiobook, read by yours truly, on Audible. The link is in the show notes.